Welcome to the pod, and I am particularly excited about sharing this episode because it is all about mountain biking, which is secretly my favourite discipline on two wheels. We managed to convince John Wild from Pedaling Perfection to come all the way from Bristol to join us in the studio to talk about mountain bike fitting, and we get straight into it. Do we even need bike fit in a mountain bike context? We talk about priorities, traction, pedaling efficiency, what methods to use when fitting a mountain bike, and what stops mountain bikers coming in for a bike fit, and who should be looking for a bike fit. And find out if John has fitted a unicycle. It's going to be a good one, so grab your tea and biscuits and settle in. Here we go.
Welcome to Cycling Demystified, brought to you by Foundation Bike Fit and Frequency Cycle Works, the podcast where we help you take your cycling to the next level by sharing the knowledge from experienced bike fitters, mechanics, and the hidden players within the bike industry.
Welcome back to the podcast, and today we have a very special guest all the way from Bristol.
Bristol!
Hey, we've got
John!
John the bike fitter,
John
all the
the
way
bike
from
fitter.
Bristol.
Thanks for having me.
From, are you Pedaling Perfection?
That is me, yeah.
That is John
Got
from
a hat
Pedaling
as well.
Perfection.
Got a cool logo.
Thank you.
You even brought a saddle with your logo on it. That was pretty exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you do unicycle fits? Because that's kind of like what the logo is.
That's one thing I've never done.
Unicycle fit.
No.
Yeah.
Tandems? Yeah.
Cargo bikes?
Yeah.
Yeah. Bromptons?
No.
There's no point, is it?
I'm not in London, no.
Well, thankfully, we're not going to talk about that today. Today, we are going to talk about mountain bike fitting.
Woohoo!
And we're going to try and explore as many different topics as possible within it. Probably first and foremost, do we need it? Like, why doesn't mountain bike fit get talked about as much as road bike fit or triathlon fit? So we decided to get John from Pedaling Perfection in to voice his opinions, as well as the rest of the crew. So we've got a full house today. We've got Matt and Ev and Way and John. So it's going to be a lively discussion, I'm sure.
Four voices talking over each other.
Yeah. But yeah, hopefully we'll get onto, I don't know, all the topics like seat tube angles, crank length, cleat position, what to do with or how to deal with sag when you're dealing with a full suspension bike, stem length, bar width, tyre size, all the rest of it, to see how much we can do. And hopefully this will give you some useful information that you can take and apply to your mountain bike riding. But yeah, shall we start with, do we actually need it? Is it going to be a thing? Is it a thing?
Well, what about why people don't think we need it, I guess? Which is fair enough, because I was a mountain biker for a long time before I was a bike fitter, and...
I think we all were, weren't we?
Yeah.
Yeah, we all grew up mountain biking.
Crashing.
Yeah, crashing.
Anyone get a bike fit on their mountain bike?
Don't be daft.
Exactly. So why don't we get bike fits on mountain bikes when almost everybody on a road bike sees it as a necessary now?
I don't know. Is it just a cultural thing? Like mountain bike? I don't know. I didn't even like really hear about mountain bike fitting until I became a bike fitter. Or is it that we can do mountain biking pretty well?
Mountain bike's a broad church though, isn't it? Like, if you're pushing up to a hill or chucking your bike in the back of a Land Rover and then just bombing down and you're not doing that much pedalling, probably not that relevant.
Or is it that mountain bikers get a better feel of setting up their own bike?
Absolutely not.
Well, yeah, maybe. But like, there's a reason why all of us started off as mountain biking and now have an interest in bike fitting.
That's true.
Is you get punished pretty quickly, potentially on a mountain bike. So we all get pretty good at setting up our own bikes because of it. I think that's not the case, but it could be that.
I thought it was. Is it not because on a mountain bike you're so upright that you could tend to be able to get away with like murder with like the saddle and like your position and stuff like that, because you're not putting the crown jewels under any duress.
I'm going to set off the QI buzzer here.
Yeah, that's
it's
what I was
because
hoping.
mountain biking is far more dynamic than road biking.
Dynamic. There we go.
So buzzer's going off. There's red lights everywhere.
We should get a buzzer.
But what I mean by that is that your body goes through a far larger range of movement and positions, and kind of the demands of the terrain are a lot more varied potentially than when you're locked into doing a very consistent repetitive pattern on your road bike, for instance. Would that be a fair judgment, fair comment, do we think?
Yeah, certainly compared with road biking, where the position is more static, then the repetition of that kind of static position, if it is wrong, you'll maybe know about it much quicker than, say, on a mountain bike.
I'm going to also say, controversial, is that perhaps mountain bikers don't trust roadie bike fitters to set up their bike, which I think is probably the biggest factor.
I think that's a very valid comment.
I've seen like so many photos and videos of people talking about mountain bike fit, and it is in no way on a flat bike, because it's got a bigger wheel on and it's on a direct drive turbo, so it can't be on a flat level ground. And then they're constantly fitting it uphill, or they can't change gradient at all.
Yeah.
So how can that possibly have any kind of accuracy?
And so the relevancy of that is going back to what Matt was saying, that mountain biking is a dynamic sport. And so if you are trying to negotiate varied terrain with your bike, and you're having to move your body to remain in a controlled position on your bike, then, fitting you in a static kind of environment, which is very controlled, probably won't get you the best results. And so maybe it's because mountain bike fitting itself is actually more difficult. Maybe it's trickier because it is more dynamic. There's more things to take into account. You have to actually take into account how a bike rider rides, rather than just their biomechanics on the bike, and considerations around what the terrain is going to require your body to do, rather than just staying in one position all the time.
Would it be fair to say that when we talk about, just to provide some context and some clarity, that when we talk about mountain bike fitting, we're talking about mountain bike disciplines where you are required to pedal as opposed to things like downhill?
Okay, yeah. So maybe that's a good place to kind of look at the
set the land.
Separate the different disciplines.
You're talking about XC,
Yeah, predominantly.
but not really enduro or
XC, trail, anything where you're kind of pedaling for a reasonable amount of time over varied terrain.
So the extremes of mountain biking would be maybe cross-country at one end and downhill on the other end. And cross-country would be the closest discipline to, say, road biking, where you're spending extended periods of time pedaling in one position. And you're having to pedal both uphill and downhill. Whereas downhill mountain biking, as the name suggests, is just going downhill. So everything is optimized for purely going downhill as fast as possible with minimal amounts of pedaling or zero pedaling uphill. And then there's kind of everything in between: trail, enduro, down country, up country, whatever we want to call it. Seems to be, a broad church in there. And yeah, it seems to be that the more kind of pedaling we have to do, or the more sustained static pedaling we have to do in one position, then does bike fit matter more then, because we're having to repeat the same position over and over, and therefore making sure that our body's capability or biomechanics to be able to repeat those positions consistently becomes more important.
Yeah, I'd say that's the easy bit from a bike fitter's perspective. We can do that statically in some degree. Not statically, but without understanding how the bike turns, goes over jumps and stuff. I did have a really interesting kind of case study, as it were, which I think I mentioned last time when we were talking about custom bikes, which was a guy that had a Geometron, which is custom, bespoke, made, and they get you in the Welsh valleys to come to their place, and then you ride trails with them, and they're all like phenomenal bike riders, and they tweak the geometry of the bike, the suspension, everything, and then they make you, Nikolai make the bikes, and they make you a custom enduro downhill bike. And it was really funny because the guy came in and I was like, he asked if he could bring his mountain bike along, and he said what it was, and I was like, yes, please, calm down, I want to see this. And we went through like a road bike fit with his normal bike, and then he was like, my saddle height is definitely going to be too low because I'm a mountain biker. And then we got him on his Geometron, and his saddle was so high, but it had been custom made around a 200mm dropper, so you couldn't drop it without buying a new seat post. And I was like, you're going to have to take it back to the factory to get it reamed out. And it was like, that seemed like such a simple thing about getting a custom bike that wasn't, it could have been so easy. Just, oh yeah, well, let's just make your saddle height the right height.
Was that how the bike came, with a 200mm dropper?
Yeah, it was all built
around. He didn't decide to, oh no, I want more drop. So.
No, it was all designed around perfectly fitting like or whatever it was, a 170 or a 200mm dropper. And we couldn't, I was like, well, what?
You'd be livid, wouldn't you?
Yeah. But it was just funny, it was like, that's the prime opportunity to get everything right.
Yeah.
And they probably got, and I was like, I will not touch anything else on the bike, because he was like, I trust the guys over at Geometron for all of that stuff. I just want to make sure the pedalling's right. And I was like, bloody hell, like, it's completely out. Like, I almost couldn't believe it. Yeah. So you just think, well, there's that aspect, right, which is just the really basic stuff, which us bike fitters can definitely get involved in. Yeah. The harder bit, I think, and the bit why this is a discussion, is how do we get the bike to handle and steer and descend and go over jumps when we are confined to these four walls. Yeah. And that's where you have currently got the upper hand, is you do have the velo park outside. Yeah. So you can actually see people riding bikes outside. Now, does that work? Does that help?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the missing part, which maybe even kind of riders haven't quite like kind of prioritized in the majority of the bike fits that we see. It's very much about the human body, biomechanics, proportions, leg length, limb lengths, and trying to make everything work within the biomechanics without consideration for, you know, how does the bike ride? Can you actually steer the bike? Can you sling it around a corner? And this is just on a road bike or a time trial bike, particularly time trial bikes. You know, we put someone in an aerodynamic position and they think they're just going to go as fast as possible. But if you can't go around a corner in your aero bars, then you've lost everything that you've just kind of worked so hard to in your aero fit. But in terms of mountain biking, I think maybe you've hit the nail on the head of, well, mountain biking prioritizes handling over everything else, really. Because you have to, like, if you can't handle the bike, you're going to come a cropper and you're going to have a really nasty fall. So, as opposed to road biking, which may prioritize fit and then handling, maybe mountain bikers prioritize handling first and then try and make their bodies fit around the bike. Would that be... I
also think the really hard bit about mountain bike setup versus road bikes is how often are we placing the consideration of grip on a road bike, and we're not really thinking about seat stay length as like how much weight you're going to have through the front wheel, which can impact how far forwards you might need to put your saddle, because if your bike isn't really the best bike for going uphill, are you having to compromise fit because the bike isn't suited for that? Whereas with road biking, we pretty much never have that conversation of the steering geometry of your bike isn't going to be applicable. It just doesn't really come up because it isn't much of a thing. You can kind of work around it because you never lose traction. Whereas on a mountain bike, like, you get the wrong geometry of the bike. You almost can't do the things you want to do on it because of that. And then we end up making fit alterations because, your front wheel keeps lifting. Okay, well then we're going to need to drop your bars, put your seat forwards. But actually we could just put a longer swing arm on the back. Right? That is what we're looking at really, and that's where it gets really complicated.
Yeah.
Is people are buying bikes, and I think mountain bikers are very focused on the handling geometry of the bike.
Yeah.
Like they're really into it. Most mountain bikers will know the reach and the stack of their bike. Most road cyclists won't.
Yeah.
They'll know the head tube angle that they've got because that's where they bought the bike.
Yeah.
Road cyclists don't care, really. I've never had a chat with a road rider about it. I care more than they care.
Yeah.
I care. We were looking at numbers the other day, and I was like, why don't they make road bikes with steep angles anymore?
Yeah,
like
or
front
you were
ends?
comparing like the old Cannondale to
Yeah.
like new Cannondale,
Yeah.
same model but completely different geometry, and you're like, why have they changed everything to make it more mediocre?
Yeah, I just don't understand it. But the thing about mountain bikers and mountain bike designers as well is that like they're obsessed with obviously sales, so that's like normal because they want to make something different. Every iteration has to be different, going in one direction or another. So like for the last 10 years it's been let's make it slacker, let's make it slacker, make it slacker. Like have you ever had a customer with a mountain bike where you said, do you know what would stop your front wheel lifting if you reduced your shock length by like 20 mil? And like if you went down from a 180 to a 160, you know, but nobody's going to go shorter because that's like asking a road rider to go to a short stem from a longer stem, you know, like a crit racer. I'm like, no, I've got to have like the longest stem possible.
Yeah.
Same thing with mountain bike. It's a bit of, shall we say, waggling of your, you know, just everything's got to be, you know, bigger or longer in one direction and better, or what they think of as better, because the media and the marketing spiel always sort of promotes that stuff. But then, you know, when it comes to actual real world riding, you suddenly realise, oh, you know, you're overbiked.
Permission to speak, sir.
Yes.
I sort of agree, but sort of disagree.
Pretty much every one of our conversations, that is your answer to everything that I say.
Because ignorance is not an excuse, right? And I think the first trick is, as always, know thyself. What are you actually looking to do with your bike, right? And unless you're exclusively just bombing around bike parks and you have no interest in pedaling up a hill and you just want your bike to be really nice and kind of, you know, solid and just point and go, and you don't need that much talent to make it go around corners or over bumps or whatever, then sure, overbike yourself, knock yourself out, sure. Go slack, go big on your suspension, whatever.
I have a conspiracy theory. Bike parks promote slacker bikes with shorter chainstays so that they can sell crane tickets, like
chairlift,
tickets.
But this is the thing, right? So there's almost too much choice, and it's like this in like with road bikes as well. You've got like almost too much choice, and the first thing you kind of need to do in terms of how your bike's going to handle and considering how your bike's going to handle is what is the appropriate tool for the job. Don't overbike yourself. Like for most people, a good cross-country bike with appropriate kind of like travel suspension set up well with the right amount of sag for your weight, all this kind of stuff, and the terrain that you're riding is going to be far more fun and appropriate than having a bigger, quote unquote, better bike that's, you know, 160, 180 mil travel, really slack, because it's not the right tool for the job. And I think that's part and parcel of it, is people are buying the wrong bikes to begin with for the job that they want them to do. And I think this is like a common thing across whatever discipline of cycling, is that what is it that that tool has to fulfill? And you kind of need to drop the ego a little bit and buy the right tool for the job first and foremost.
This goes back to the bike fitter's remit, right? Because whenever you say know thyself.
Well, you can't put a square peg in a round hole, can you?
And whenever somebody walks in and they're like, okay, I've got this bike. And it's like, cool bike, look, make this bike fit me. You guys are just like, okay, let's put the bike over in this corner now and then stand you in front of a mirror and look at you and figure out what you need. Forget about the bike you just wasted your money on.
Yeah, but this is the thing, isn't it? It's like, yeah, like there's a, whatever bike it is, there's a body on the bike.
Yeah.
And if you're talking about mountain bike fitting specifically, and in our kind of this case, kind of mountain biking where you are doing a reasonable amount of pedaling, then the more pedaling that you do, the more how the body interacts with the bicycle becomes a thing.
There's definitely more instances where you can't get someone to fit nicely onto a mountain bike because of suspension forks, right? That adds so much stack to a bike. So you're like, well, okay, that's just not going to work.
Or 29er wheels.
29er wheels, 140 front fork, then you can't really get that to fit.
Yeah.
Smaller riders, right? It just doesn't work.
That's what I've got. That's exactly what I've got.
But that's a valid point. It's like, it's like you're over biked, and that has a biomechanical impact, a positional impact.
It's all a compromise, isn't it?
Yeah.
The whole point is that all of that stuff, suspension, geometry, all of that stuff on a mountain bike is a compromise so that when you're out of the saddle and you're doing complex terrain and you're getting big hits and stuff like that, that you can, the bike is easier to handle, supposedly.
So going
But
back to the
it might
original
not.
question then,
Yeah.
is how relevant is mountain bike fitting?
Well, do you think then, like, if you prioritise handling of the bike and how it feels when you're riding it, and how it steers and how it grips, how it corners, how it feels over a jump, all that kind of stuff, then would a better way of making a decision be just to test ride a mountain bike to begin with, and several others like on the same day? Remember you talking about a shop near where you live where they just get people in just to test ride a whole bunch of bikes, and then off they go with that bike that feels the best for them, and that's a rider's decision. And then maybe like the hope is then there's enough adjustment in that to allow for some biomechanical sympathy. Then we can adjust it enough, like we can adjust the seat height to the right place, and usually that kind of works good enough, and they'll enjoy the bike because it feels right.
Okay, so let's say you're doing the perfect way around. You've got to fit first,
Yeah.
which is obviously what we should be preaching. How do you go about sizing someone up for a mountain bike without a mountain bike already? If you can't simulate gradient, or you can't get them to ride outside, because you can't take the jig outside.
No.
So how do you then go, actually we can give you a prescription of this is what you should be looking for in numbers before they've bought the bike?
I guess you can start with the biomechanical kind of model of, well, we can clearly see that this position here is too long for you, it's stretching you out too far, but this position here is clearly too short for you. And so, maybe somewhere in between would kind of work. Similarly with like seat height and saddle position and so on, just to have a starting point.
So, have you read, what's his name, Lee McCormack's book on mountain bike fit?
No.
It's dialed, fit by something like the numbers of bike fit or something.
Right.
And it's really interesting. That's what sparked the whole thing for me, is this guy has just got like tables and tables of numbers of like, he gets you to do some tests and you get your rad number.
Yeah.
And then you put in your rad angle, right? You laugh. Okay, so it's
Talk
like,
to me like I am a complete greenie.
right? But a really surreal moment, because me and Tony, right?
Yeah.
I was like, we've got to try this. We've got to test this. Because I'll entertain any idea. This is really interesting. So we got a bike set up with an incline, and we did it like the way that we view it is, you take the seat post out when you're doing a mountain bike fit.
Yeah.
First and foremost, you take the seat and seat post off the bike, and you figure out where you want the handlebars to be for going down. Number one, it's got to feel great when you're descending. Why else would we be mountain biking? And then we put the saddle back in, we figured out the height for going up as well, figured out the balance and everything. And I was giggling so much because I'd already got this rad number and rad angle from this book. and we put it into bike CAD, and it was within like 2 mil.
Really?
And we had no rationale for how we started the bike or anything like that. We didn't start at this rad number or anything like that. I was like, bloody hell, I guess there's something to this, right? And like, well, oh, maybe. And then you go, okay, maybe that's a good starting point. Because this guy doesn't care about your inseam or your height or anything like that. Yeah. It's a relationship of where your hands are versus your feet. Mm-hmm. So you like stand up. He gets you to like stand next to a wall like this, and then you mark on the wall whereabouts your hands are relative to the floor.
We should describe what you're doing.
Yeah, I realised that I was just
standing up with your hands at your side, your fists at your side.
Yeah, as if you're holding like a barbell or a handlebar, and then you draw like a little mark on the wall on a bit of paper, and then you measure the height from the ground upwards. And then his rationale is that then if you kind of hinged forwards, like you're doing a deadlift or something, that like well, we kind of know this anyway, but the lower the front end is, the further away it's going to be, but the number is probably always going to stay the same. Because it's a triangle, it just pivots forwards or back. So with your downhill bike, you're going to be taller and shorter. For your cross-country bike, you're going to be longer and lower. So that's your rad with 2 A's, so rad number, rider angle something distance.
Angle distance.
And then your rad number is just your height. And like I figured this out, and then I was like, okay, well, it's going to be a cross-country bike, so my rad angle is going to be such and such. And it was bang on. It really threw me. It really threw me, because I was like, hang on, are we doing this all wrong? Should we be doing 0.8 3 times your inseam in bike fitting as well, right? But then I was like, okay, maybe there is some merit to that. Like, and he talks about applying this to everything, like bar width, not stem length, but saddle height and everything like that. But then maybe that is a more informed decision than. And the weird thing is like the next day I had a guy come in who was like a mountain biker, and he was like, yeah, my rad number. I was like, how have I only just learned about this? You know about your rad number and stuff. So maybe there is some merit to that as a beginning sizing for a mountain bike.
But essentially what you've described is kind of what we go through in a fit process anyway. We try and figure out the limitations of a body in a bike riding position. So you figure out, where your seat height is based on, leg extension and kind of a rider's height, and that's determined by, their flexibility and hamstring mobility and all that kind of stuff. But also, how far they can hinge. So, can we get you into a good posture, and what would be, where would your handlebars feel good if you're in that kind of good posture? So there is kind of coaching within that. So I guess it's a more dynamic way of, coaching someone into the right kind of body positions. And then, instead of having rad numbers, we just use the, X, Ys.
It's ballpark, isn't it? The whole idea of all these things is to get a ballpark figure or idea of a starting point, and then from there you can go, okay, no, actually I want to be a little bit low or a little bit longer or a little bit shorter or whatever.
And I hate that. I oppose everything about it, but it's interesting seeing like, Atherton bikes. They do 22 sizes for every bike they do, which is just mind-boggling. And they do that off like an algorithm, and apparently they get people just buy it online. Just straight off those numbers. You are whatever, and then here's $5,000 for a frame.
That sounds great for them.
But then, if the bike handles like amazingly, and you're able to, manipulate your body enough that it feels good, or you're able to ride it, then is that enough? Maybe, I don't know, different people have different ideas on value and cost. But
and it was funny because when we were playing around with it, we were talking about going down a hill, getting the weight over the back wheel, whereabouts are your shoulders most stable. And then you look at pictures of like G. Atherton going off a drop, and he's in like a full-on overhead press almost. He's so far off the bottom, and you can just see his delts just bulging as he can hold it. And you think, well, for that guy, he's conditioned to be able to chuck that bike around and save it from in these weird contorted body positions. So he's not going to sacrifice that if he thinks he can make it ride better in other circumstances.
Yeah.
So then it comes to the off-the-bike conditioning and how strong you are to manoeuvre the bike.
So it's really similar with whenever we're talking about road bike position, and you know everyone's looking at the pros and trying to emulate the pros. And you're like, yeah, but those guys are doing it. They're riding 6 hours a day. We're not. So we cannot get ourselves into that position.
Exactly.
And put that sort of power out.
Rule
and
one, know thyself.
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing is with, like with the rad thing and the like mountain bike fit. If you're as soon as you eliminate one of the points of contact, all of a sudden, if you've just got feet and hands, you've got so much more ability to move the bike under you or to move over the bike, right? To change your center of gravity.
And I think that maybe that's the interesting one, is that the focus, in my opinion, should be on where the handlebars in relationship to the feet. Because pretty much everybody, apart from maybe a few, you put the saddle back in place and then you look like you're riding a mountain bike. They're so much more upright. They're not anywhere near their limits of forward flexion. So you're kind of like, oh, it's not that bad. Yeah. But I would always find that the going uphill and going downhill on a mountain bike overrides anything, unless you're doing like a really pedally course.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I'll give you some examples then. Also, I think where to go with this, but okay. First of all, I think like that aspect of like fitting a bike, I think has become more important. I think it's more critical to get that front end of the bike relative to feet right in the modern era as well, because bike companies have got to a point where the front end of a mountain bike is almost set because of the geometry considerations. Everyone's gone much longer on the on the reach or top tubes of bikes. Combine that with a very short stem, really wide handlebars, slack head tube angle, in order to achieve a certain kind of handling characteristic. And if you change that by changing a stem length or different bar configuration, then I think it has a greater impact on the overall feel of the bike than, say, a maybe more conservative rather than progressive kind of geometry that we see these days. And so if your bike is like just too long for you, too far away from the feet, or it's really easy to make that mistake of like getting the bike like too short or too long these days, and then there's not that much you can do about it. So I'd say there is a good argument for either getting a bike fit or testing a bike before you buy it. Otherwise, you just don't know whether or not that front end is going to be right or not.
Shall we merge that into the next topic, which is seat tube angles?
Yeah,
because that is the major change in mountain bikes over the past 10 years.
Yeah. This is what I like to call shoehorning. It's like, oh, how can we make this work with like 64-degree hand angle and like your wheel way out the front?
Well, I
can't climb on a bike like that.
I think they were designed in conjunction with each other. Like the idea.
Were they?
Well, it depends if like the first people that came up with, well, air quotes, progressive kind of geometry, kind of designed it all together. But whether or not that's just been kind of manipulated and lost within like the mass market now is like another question.
So why have they gone for steeper seat tube angles?
Well, ironically, I think it was about pedaling. They wanted a bike that kind of pedaled better, in particular pedaling uphill. But also, in consideration of like just getting the seat out of the way. Now with the advent of like dropper posts and things like that, where you can just drop the seat out of the way, you can just get out of the way of the rider when you're going downhill. So it seemed to be the best of both worlds. You could have a seat that was out of the way when you're going downhill, and also a seat that was in a more optimal position when you're pedaling uphill. So since most mountain biking is going uphill or downhill, then a steeper seat tube angle seems to make sense. But then, steeper seat tube angle has an effect on, the reach of the bike. So then they made the reach longer, but then also they wanted to preserve the handling of the bike, so they made the head tube angle slacker, bars a bit wider, but then you have to shorten the stem to make sure the steering is still quick. That's kind of how I thought about it. So it might be something completely different.
My example, which I'd like to run past everybody because it confused the hell out of me, was that the Stiff, who's like the importer of Santa Cruz, they came out with it's called the Sasquatch, which is a hardtail with like a 78-degree seat tube angle. In my mind, a steep seat tube angle only really has benefits on a full suspension bike. Because when you go uphill, you're going to weight more on the back. The seat post is going to get slacker anyway, and that's part of the problem. On a hardtail, you go uphill, actually, you're going to compress the fork more anyway, so you're only going to get steeper on a hardtail. And I wonder if that is, again, as Ev was kind of talking about, it's like fashion focused almost. It's like they've got to come up with something new to sell them. Let's make a hardtail with a really steep seat tube angle, because the full suspension bikes everybody's lapping up, when really there wasn't really a need for it. I can't get my head around that concept of why they would do that on a hardtail. Anyone got any ideas as to why?
I love marketing. I love having a go at marketing people, and it's we've talked about this loads of times, where you've got the structure of a company, right? Whatever, you're a bike designer, you're a manufacturer, whatever, and then all of a sudden, like it happens in all other industries, the marketing department just gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and eventually they start calling the shots instead of the designers, instead of the actual experts on making bikes. So it's like, and it's a really difficult thing to convince people of, to say that, but this is a huge, big company, like obviously they know what they're doing. So, and if you then poo-poo that, and you're like, no, they don't. They're listening to their marketing people who've shown them a spreadsheet, shown them a graph in a presentation, and said, this is what people want, this is what people are buying. And all of a sudden they're like, I guess we're doing that now, But maybe you love the sentence. Perhaps they don't have your best interests
They don't have
at
your
heart.
best interests at heart, absolutely not, and it's all marketing tosh. But I think, like, if I take my facetious hat off for 1 minute, then if you think about how, especially cross-country mountain bikes and mountain biking has developed since we were doing it 10, 15, 20 years ago. Like 20 years ago, cross-country was like, I'd rather watch paint dry. It was so dull and so boring. And it was basically like cyclocross. They were like riding around a field with tape around it. Now the courses are so hard, so exciting, and so technically demanding that maybe the bikes have to be more extreme in order to deal with those harder courses. So like the steeper seat tube angles, if the gradients are so steep and you're compressing that fork so much, maybe you have to be that far forward in order to make the bike pedal up a hill.
For the sake of entertainment, you don't want them on bikes that can handle a course. You want them to be underbiked, because that's what's entertaining.
But then
I used to love across country, because before dropper posts came out, they just looked naff, didn't they?
Yeah.
Like, it just was embarrassing to the sport almost. They all got off when they went downhill. Whereas now it is way better, and like they are underbiked.
Yeah.
Still a little bit, yeah.
Some of those courses they've done this year are insane, and they've got 100 mil travel on. Like,
But maybe that's the kind of the thing. It's like things are getting more and more extreme in terms of the terrain and the courses at the professional level. But as we know, everything trickles down. So the people who are buying the bikes are now buying bikes that are designed with, people like Nino Schurter in mind. And maybe that's not appropriate for the mass
road bikes, though, isn't it?
Exactly. It's the same as road bike. Everyone wants the Canyon Air Road because Van der Poel crushes on it.
Well, interestingly, I think cross-country mountain bikes are still hovering around about 74 degrees for like a seat tube.
Not a Scott Spark, mate.
But their head angles have gotten sort of
a bit slacker, But it's the hardcore hardtails that come out with these super steep seat tube angles and super slack head tube angles. And I think maybe like what you were saying about, like if you're on a hardtail, where's your suspension? Is the front fork. That's the only bit of suspension. So you want to use that. And if you've got a big fork, if you've got a hardcore hardtail with like a 160 fork on it, that's your point of suspension. Like that's what you want to use. You don't want to land on your back wheel.
So you set your seat tube angle.
So you're almost over prioritizing using that kind of front fork, but it's got like so far. Like I don't see how people can be landing and using the front fork and compressing that front fork without pitching their weight so far forward that you're almost going to go over the front bars.
Well, that's but if you're riding a bike like that, like a hardtail with a 75, 76 degree seat, well, maybe even 78 degree seat tube angle with a 160 fork, and you're not getting a lift up to the top and you're trying to pedal on that thing, then you're an idiot. You've got the wrong bike. Like that's what I was saying earlier. You've bought the wrong tool for the wrong job. You're trying to hang a picture in your hallway with a sledgehammer. Like it's just not appropriate. And this is the thing, it's like hardcore hardtails have their place, but they're on ski lifts up to the top of a bike park.
Or three riders.
Yeah, or whatever. So this is it, it's about the tool for the job.
Yeah. Well, it's, again, like, are we just a bunch of old men?
Yes.
Because when
that's
I look
our
at mountain
prerogative.
bikes now, I look at that's my mountain bike, and that's very specifically set up and dialed in for the way I like it to be. Yeah. But if you compare that to a modern bike, it's like it's way steeper at the front, it's way slacker at the back. Yeah. The drop is only 125 mil. It's like you can't even get that.
Who even are you?
Yeah, well, what's the point? But I'm like, I get on a modern mountain bike. I'm like, I don't want a 200 mil dropper. I want to know that the saddle is between my knees when I need to use my knees to mess the bike around, and stuff like that. And like, I want to know where the front axle is, and all of these things. But then there's just reams and reams and reams of geometry numbers and ideas and YouTube channels going on about how this is now better and this is better. And then you ride the bikes, you're like, this thing handles like a boat. Like, this is boring.
Send a telegram before you go around the corner.
Yeah, I want it to be sharp and fun, but if a beginner, I suppose, not that I'm a bloody expert mountain biker, but if a total beginner gets on that bike, they'll probably be scared for their life because it's not what they've been told to expect.
But we have this in road as well. Like there's a generation of like young road cyclists that have never ridden non-electric shifting.
Yeah.
And it's the same in mountain
bikes.
Yeah, or rim brakes. And it's the same in mountain biking. There's a generation of mountain bikers that haven't ridden anything less than 140 mil travel on their fork.
Yeah.
Or haven't ridden a head tube steeper than like 66.5.
Yeah.
Or a bike without a dropper post.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or a hardtail.
Yeah.
Or anything smaller than 29-inch wheels. The list goes on. But this is the thing, isn't it? It's like you have to kind of experience these things, and this is where the test ride argument really comes in, as well as the bike fit argument, depending on what you're looking to do with the bike.
I'll give you two stories then, just to illustrate that point. So one was like, I was recently out at Bike Park in Northampton, which is great. Like it's like really small but free, like community-led, like kind of bike park, full of jumps and berms and things like that. So it's really a jump-orientated, kind of free ride kind of like park. But there are kids there hammering around it and launching themselves off all the jumps and so on. But the thing that struck me was that they were all swapping bikes. Like, they're all teenagers, but they were like, oh, let's have a go on yours. And then they just swap it over, drop the seat post, and off they went. Didn't matter what bike it was, what bar it was, whatever. They were just there to ride. And they were all like launching themselves off these jumps, and everyone made it, and it was all fine. And then they'd swap bikes again, and then they go off. And like, that was really refreshing to see, because like there was a complete range of bikes. There was like a Yeti there. It was like this guy was like, yeah, I got the pimped out bike, and then the other kids were all on Carreras and stuff like that. But it's just a mishmash of bikes, but they're all just like there to ride and like having a go. And that was in total contrast to someone we had in the Bike Fit studio who'd ordered like this custom bike. He was a pretty big lad, but he was just riding around Epping Forest and so on, and just just
like
poodling around, but
like
it was mountain
enduro rig or
biking.
something, yeah.
And for Epping Forest, it's like the biggest elevation is probably like 200 meters or something. That is not challenging terrain, but you go out there and there's a bunch of blokes on full suspension, like mountain bikes and so on. You don't need that bike. But this guy, he had a hardcore hardtail and he was riding around there, and he was just getting numb hands, neck ache, shoulder ache, and so on. And lo and behold, it was because his like kind of seat tube angle was 76.5 degrees and just pitching too much weight forward and so on. It just wasn't the right bike. But he couldn't work it out. And actually what he needed was to come in here, and we actually ended up building him a custom bike with a 73 degree, maybe 72.5. Don't know, I can't remember.
Can't remember.
Yeah, it was like 73, round about the old classic kind of 73 degree seat tube angle, but it was a massive bike. Just because.
Oh, I do remember. Yeah, 73 degrees.
Yeah.
Yeah, with a layback post.
With a layback post, yeah.
Oh, it should have been a layback post.
That was just kind of what he needed because he wanted to pedal around. So I think, that just kind of illustrates the point of like kind of, well, what do you want to do on the bike, and when does pedaling and handling, which one becomes the priority? If you're at the free ride park and you can just get your bike to kind of ride well and hang on, that's probably, you're going to have loads of fun. And you're going to have a break at the bottom, and you're not going to put your body under that much stress and so on. But if you're just pedaling around all day long around Epping Forest, and that's the majority of your riding, then maybe like getting a biomechanically kind of sound position matters more. And so you need to know like kind of what do you need?
That's interesting. We had a chap in, remember, who was trying to do the South Downs Wear in 24 hours, front to back and back to front. And he had, I think he had an S-Works Epic. Yeah. And that was going to be a pedally position. Yeah. Because you're just pedaling all the time. Yeah. Like, South Downs isn't mega terrain, but it is just non-stop pedaling. And it's what does the bike need to do for you? That's the first consideration.
I definitely think if you plan to be on your bike for a significant period of time, as opposed to just push up the hill and ride back down, then fit. If you're uncomfortable or you're struggling to control the bike, definitely bike fit is of interest, and we can probably make some fun tweaks to it. The bit that I think, because I post up like a survey on Single Track forum ages ago, and the biggest feedback was, I'm worried that I'm going to get told that I need to buy a new bike to solve this problem. And I was like, that probably is the most likely take home from a mountain bike fit, because we can't do much about, actually the head tube angle is just way too slack on this bike, that's why the fork's like lifting up when you're climbing. It's nothing to do with how we set up the bike, we're going to compromise fit on that. And like, I had a lady in the other day, and immediately she got on the bike, I was like, you need to go buy a new bike. Just straight away, because she's already on a 35mm, 40mm stem. Can't make it any shorter. So straight away, and I think that actually is a genuine concern for a lot of mountain bikers, is your hands are tied to some degree because you just can't change that much. It is a whole bike system that you're going to need to tweak and change. And like, you might have to get a custom bike because of, they just don't make bikes anymore that have a slack seat tube angle, things like that.
And generally the culture of mountain biking is a little bit less dentist and investment banker than road biking. So, people are all after a deal. I mean, you see that even, you compare the like GCN versus GMBN, right? GMBN is constantly like, well, this is a little bit expensive, here's a cheaper option. GCN is like, well, this is only 10 grand. And it's like, people are like, whatever.
I need a new
bike. I need a new bike. Well, I may as well. I've got a 6-car garage, I might as well have another bike.
There's a bit more of a cultural thing into it.
So I think we're going to have to wrap it up here because we're running out of time, but I'm not sure what we got to on that one.
We got to point number 2 on the list.
I mean, there's so much to kind of like talk about, so maybe we'll have to get you back in, John, for another one on that.
I'd love to come back.
Let's talk about suspension. That's a whole podcast in
Yeah.
itself.
Drop
didn't-
bags.
And drop bags.
Drop bag, drop bags, crank length, cleat position, saddles,
36-inch wheels.
My goodness, there's so much.
So much to talk about.
But yeah, have a think about it, guys. What are you prioritizing? Is it your pedaling? Is it your handling? Hopefully you want both.
Is it your ego?
But yeah, the more informed you are, the better choices you can make. So whether that's testing bikes or getting a bike fit, just getting an opinion. If you are afraid about changing your bike, or that could be an outcome, wouldn't you actually want to know whether or not what you're riding could be better or not? Like, then you can make the decision. You can make the decision to stick with what you got, make the most of it, or get something new. Sell what you've got.
I would also say, if anyone is looking at getting a bike fit on a mountain bike, quiz the bike fitter
Oh yeah.
as to how much they actually are invested in this, right?
Yeah.
Like, not to say that we're going to do the best job. There will be plenty of people out there, but there's so many people that are clueless. Like, I don't mean that in the harshest possible way. They don't know about mountain biking, and that's fair enough. That's not their niche. But don't take a mountain bike to a bike fit place that isn't equipped to do it.
A triathlon bike fitter.
Exactly, because they're not going to know. It's a completely different sport.
Yeah. So yeah, just pick the practitioner, talk to them, figure it. Yeah. All right.
Right.
Cheers, lads. See you in the next one. If you're looking for a bike fit and in the Bristol area, whether that's for a mountain bike, triathlon bike, road bike, John is your man. John Wild is based at the 73 Degrees Bike Shop, and you can find him at pedalingperfection.com, on Instagram at pedalingperfection, or at John the Bike Fitter. So give him a shout and he will look after you. If you're in the London area and looking for a mountain bike fit, then give us a shout. We are unique in that we have access to mountain bike trails around the Velo Park, and so we can literally test your position and watch you ride and figure out if a bike fit is really what you need. So get in touch with us, info@foundation.fit, or on Instagram at FDN_bikefit. All right, catch you later.
Suffering from numb hands, tingling toes, and any other persistent discomforts when you ride? These are all signs that your bike fit could be improved. If you're bike fit curious, get in touch with Way or Matt by emailing info@foundation.fit or finding them on Instagram at FDN_bikefit. Finally, for all your bike servicing needs, custom dream bike or hand-built wheels, go to www.frequencycycleworks.com or find me on Instagram at frequencycycleworks. Until next time, keep on spinning.